Hi, I'm Jennifer Sir from the Sewing Room. Over the next few weeks, I will show you how to do different kinds of seams. And seams are really important because they're the foundation of what makes up your garment. We want to make sure our seams are stable and that they're pretty. So sometimes having them look as nice on the inside as it does on the outside makes a huge difference in the way you feel about your garment. So let's get started and sew some seams. Let's learn how to make a plain seam with bound edges. Our next seam sample is a plain seam with bound edges. This is really a nice finish for a jacket, an unlined jacket or a partially lined jacket, something that you're going to see the inside on. And the first thing that I'm going to tell you is that I'm using, instead of using seam binding, I am using 1-inch wide hem tape, which is also bias, but it ends up being a little bit wider than the double fold 1/4 inch seam binding and a little bit smaller than the 1/2 inch double fold seam binding. And I think it looks a little bit prettier and gives you a little bit more room in your seam allowance. So we're going to start with your pieces on the right side, so right side up, and we have the back side of the hem tape, and basically I am opening it up so the right side's together, and I am pinning it along the right side. So right side's together. And it's going to go all the way down. And what we're going to do is we are going to sew in this little groove right here. And it's nice and it's pressed nicely for us, so that's awesome. Go ahead and sew in the groove. So the groove is 1/4 inch away. And once we have that 1/4 inch sewn, we're going to go ahead and press the seam allowance towards the facing. And then we're going to wrap the seam allowance over to the back side. Now, in this case, it's coming over. We don't really quite want it the full 1/2 inch, but we want it just a little bit below the stitch line on this side. So I'm going to go ahead and pin it. So it's about 3/8 of an inch is showing. And I can pin it from the front side too, because we're actually going to sew from the front side. And as you can see right here, we can see that a little bit is showing. We want to make sure that we're not getting too close to the stitch line for when we join our seams, but I can see a small shadow of where it is on the back side when I hold it up with the light behind it. And what that's going to do is allow us to stitch in the ditch. We could get it closer to the stitch line on the back and just do a top stitch, but I like to stitch in the ditch because I think it's just a prettier finish overall. And if you have time to do that, then it makes for a prettier finish. One more pin close to the top. So as you can see, I'm going to turn this around. Our binding on the back side is caught with the pin, so it stays in place. And I'm going to make sure the needle goes down right in the ditch. And we're trying to avoid getting on the blue and just staying right in the ditch between the blue and the gray. And again, using matching thread, either for the binding, if you're doing contrast binding, just in case you accidentally touch the binding, it's good to have thread that matches the binding. Like I just messed up a tiny bit right there, but that's okay. My ditch stitching needs a little bit of practice. And you'll repeat for the other side of the seam. Once you have both sides of your seam finished with the binding, then you'll put both edges together. And for this one, I'm going to do a 5/8 inch seam. And when pressed open, you can see how nicely that finishes the edges.